Hi everyone and welcome to our first online video. Hopefully you've all received a pack with your flowers, your fresh flowers, and you conditioned them like the instructions on the package, and you've stored them somewhere nice and cool overnight. And in the video that's following, it'll give you instructions on hopefully how to make this beautiful design. So this month we've taken inspiration from the European design called a Parallel, and you'll see that I've arranged everything in very vertical parallel placements. So by parallel we mean that the gap in between the flowers is the same from top to bottom, and it's a little bit like railway lines that you see where the space between them is the same, is equidistant all the way along. And these vertical placements are above some very interesting groundwork which is created by different textures and shapes of foliage. Now if you researched or you Google a parallel arrangement and you look at one that's been done and created by a European designer, you will find that the spaces between each vertical placement is a lot more severe, and when an area is filled with flowers we call it positive space. When there's a gap in between the flowers we call it negative space. And when the Europeans create these lovely designs, they have a lot bigger negative space in between each placement of flowers. But the British designer tends to make it a little bit more informal and make it a little bit more like a garden border. So if you were looking at your herbaceous border, this is very similar to how the flowers would arrange, how they would naturally be arranged in the garden. So within your packs you have everything to create this fantastic design. So sit back, enjoy, watch the video as many times as you want, enjoy the flowers. Don't worry at all if it doesn't look anything like mine at the end. Just enjoy what you've got and have a great evening or a fantastic afternoon. So in your pack of goodies that you would have received is the container. So we have this lovely zinc container, or possibly aluminium, with the lovely two handles on either side, and a piece of floral foam. And the floral foam will fit just right, snugly and neatly into the container. And first of all we need to soak the floral foam. So when it arrived with you it would be dry and quite lightweight and a little paler in the colour green. And to arrange flowers into it, it needs to be fully soaked to keep the keep the flowers hydrated while you're arranging. So you need to find yourself a container. It doesn't have to be large like this. I'm only using a big container so you can see the process as it happens. You could use your kitchen sink or a large bucket or a large container that you might have at home. But what you don't want to do is to pour the water over the top of the foam. It needs to soak very naturally and slowly so that it absorbs the water all the way through. If you force it under the water or hold it under the water, you'll have air pockets will be created. And then when you do insert the flowers, there'll be dry patches and dry sections within the foam. So just allow it to soak very naturally. Now this is a good point, or a good stage in the arranging, where you can pop off, pour yourself a glass of wine, cheeky gin and tonic, or make yourself a cup of tea. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes once the floral foam is completely soaked. So you can see now the foam is almost sunk to the bottom, and if I just lift it up you'll see that it's green in consistency, or green in colouring I should say, all the way through. And you can hold that just for a couple of seconds to drain off any excess water. And I'll just move this out of the way. Put that down to one side, and then you can get your container ready for us to put the foam into the container. Now you'll see on the top of the foam there's some writing, and there are 3 sections clearly marked out on the top of the foam. And this is just an indication that if we need to cut the foam into smaller sections, it's already accurately measured for us. And a good little tip, if you just run your nail or the scissors or a pen or something down the middle, we can split the oasis into the front and the back, and then when we're arranging I can explain to you whether we're at the front or the back. So if we go left to right, just run your nail or the scissors or something down. Doesn't have to be accurate, just a rough sort of guide. And then this piece of floral foam will sit quite snugly into the container. If you just push it down as far as it will go, you will end up with it quite snugly fitting into the bottom of that container. Now the design we're going to do today is front facing, so all of the flowers will be facing in one direction, and we don't have to worry at the beginning too much about covering the foam there at the back. I'll work on the design facing me, and then I'll turn it round every now and again so that you can see how it's coming together. And hopefully you'll be able to follow the instructions quite clearly as we go along. Now the first plant material that we're going to use is going to be the birch. Now I'll talk you through everything that we've got so that you can see the flower content and you can see what you've been provided with. So today's design is a parallel arrangement, so I've chosen plant material and flowers that have a very linear shape to them. So if you can imagine that, it's very much like a line, makes your eye travel from the top to the bottom. And then if I show you something like this gerbera, if it's arranged in this sort of manner, again we have that very tall line shape with the stem. If we just use the head, then this is what we call a form, or a sort of round shape. So we have rounds and we have lines. And in this style of arrangement, I've chosen lots of plant material that would be categorised as a line material. So if we just talk you through what you would have been given, this is the birch, and this originally would have been fresh, but it dries out and it lasts forever and a day really, so you can reuse this in arrangements at a later time. It's good at Christmas time if you're doing any wreaths or Christmas table arrangements. And then we have two of the liatris. Now, for those of you who've done traditional flower arranging, you might be wondering why I've given you two of something, as often people assume you have to use 3s, 5s and 7s when you're arranging flowers. But in more modern or European style of arranging, we use slightly different rules. So you have two of the liatris, then we have two of this very pretty flower. Now it looks quite delicate, but it's actually quite robust. Its common name is lion heads, but its Latin name is Physotegia. Now if you've had a few glasses of wine, that's a bit of a mouthful to say. And then we have some of the delphinium. This variety is called Vulcanfrida, and it's that lovely sort of quite vibrant blue. And you should have 3. For some reason I've only picked up 2, or I've only picked up 1, so I need to get myself another 2 of those. Then you have this lovely gerbera. This one is called Neon, and it is quite a sort of mulberry purple sort of tone. It's quite an unusual colour. Very, very vibrant, very pretty. And if you have a choice, so we're aiming to have 3 that are quite tall and straight. So those are probably my best for the tall and straight ones. If you have one that's slightly leaning forward, he's going to go lower down. So have a little look at them and try and pick ones that are nice and tall and straight. And again, those traditional flower arrangers might be wondering why I've given you 4, because you don't normally arrange with 4, but we're going to put them in 2 separate placements, a group of 3 and one on its own. And then again, we have 1 snapped rose, but we have 4 roses all together. And again, we're going to be arranging these in a group of 3 together and 1 on its own, and that corresponds better with the European design rules. Then we have a little bit of filler foliage, For those of you who come to workshops with me often, you will recognise this possibly as pistache. It's a European grown foliage, quite often found in countries like Greece, where it grows. It's a little bit like our privet. It grows quite freely in very warm countries. It's a very long lasting foliage, quite robust, and is brilliant for just covering little gaps and filling in any areas that aren't covered with the flowers. And then we have two of these lovely ferns. This is one of the asparagus. This is Densiflora Myers, and it's often bought because it has that lovely draping effect to cascade over the side of a container. But today I'm using it in very straight parallel placements. So I've given you the best ones. You should have lovely straight branches, or lovely straight stems I should say. I'm going to work with the curved pieces, just not to waste them. So that one's got an interesting shape. It's trying to grow around the corner a little bit. And that's your plant material. So we've got a nice selection, a purpley pink colour theme, and a selection of foliage just to give you some texture and some interest within the design. So as well as the flowers and the container, you would have been provided with some larger leaves that would have been in the brown bag that we sent out to you. And a little tip, if you're arranging in the future, you can always keep single large leaves in a little bag like this, because the moisture will be retained in the bag, and it's a good environment for the flowers and the foliage. And I've given you these really cute little fatsia. So in this country we tend to refer to them as fatsia, but they are actually aralia leaves. And I've given you two smallish leaves that work nicely together. So one slightly bigger than the other one, and we'll arrange them together. And as well as those, I would have given you, right in the bottom of my bag, these lovely Galax leaves. And this has this gorgeous sort of purple tone to it, which coordinates really well with the gerbera and that lovely birch. So a nice link with the colour. And just get this out of the way, get a few more leaves out of the bottom. Now you had approximately 10 of these lovely little Galax leaves, and when they're fresh they can come in two different colours. So they're either this lovely brown, or earlier on in the season they're a green sort of shade, and then as the season matures and the weather affects the leaf slightly, it turns to this lovely burgundy sort of brown colour. Okay, so now for the exciting part. I'm going to get to do some arranging. So this design is front facing, so we're only going to see it from one side, and the back we can cover in with a small little bit of foliage. And we're going to start on what would be your left, so your left side of the floral foam. And if you remember, I asked you to draw that sort of line down the middle just to separate off the front and the back. We're going to be working initially in this back section here, so you have that whole back area to work within. And we're going to start with the first tall placement, and this is going to be the birch. Now in your pack of flowers you could have received one quite thick branch like this, or you might have received two smaller ones, or possibly three smaller ones. And we're going to start by creating a little bit of a cluster into one corner. So the parallel arrangement that we're making this afternoon has very obvious vertical placements in the design. I'm going to remove these little side shoots because they're a little bit bendy and they'll confuse the parallel lines that we're trying to create. And I've cut a nice tall piece of the birch, which is a roughly sort of 1.5 times the size of my container. So if you lay your birch on top, that is one, and then from there to the end is roughly a half, maybe 2 as it thins out towards the top. And anything that's bending slightly, you can see this one here, it's a little bit curved, that will spoil the very tall vertical placements that we're trying to create. And we're going to insert this into that top left hand corner towards the back of the phone. And because I've given you a nice large piece of the birch, we're going to do a few pieces together just to thicken up that first placement that we're putting on that back left hand side. So at the moment it's your right because you're looking at the back of it, but if I just tilt that forward and we'll spin it round, so you'll be working at it from this angle, and you'll see that I've arranged in that back quarter, or that back sixth I should say, and I've spread, even though we've got very tall sort of linear placements, I haven't put them too close together, so I've used quite a large piece of the foam there at the back. Don't arrange by putting your pieces of birch in too far back to the at the back of the floral foam, otherwise they'll fall off. And don't come too far forward because we have other flowers to put there at the front. So that's your first placement on the left hand side, a sort of clustered group in a very vertical line. Now next of all we're going to put the lovely liatris, so a fantastic example of a linear plant material, and depending on how tall you went with this first placement, you can either go slightly taller with this plant material, or I'm going to go slightly lower so that my finish of the birch is there. And to finish on a different level, we're going to put the liatris about 1 inch or so further down. So cut the bottoms at a little bit of an angle so that we have a point going into the floral foam rather than a very severe base to the plant material. And I'm just going to remove a little bit of the foliage that possibly could go into the bottom of the foam. And this one is going to go in on the opposite side. So at the moment we're working on the back right hand piece of the floral foam, and I'm finishing with my heights at different levels. If we finish with everything at the same position, it tends to look very unnatural and a little bit too formal. And if you have a choice and you have one liatris that's slightly smaller than the second piece, we're going to start with the smaller one first and the larger piece second. That's because it will create movement of your eye down towards what sort of will be your focal point at the end. So if you haven't got a choice, if both of your purple flowers are the same height, don't worry too much about it. And then again, I've made a nice clean section on the bottom, cut at a little bit of a point, and then we're going to place it. Now I'm going to go to the right, but you're going to end up with two. If we put it to the side, they're very straight, and if you look at it from the front, the space in between is the same all the way from top to bottom. So that gives you your parallel placements. Try not to have your plant material leaning back or leaning forward. And if you think of a railway track, this is exactly like those railway lines, parallel from top to bottom, the same distance at the bottom as at the top. And as I often say when we're doing workshops, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just an arrangement for you to enjoy in the house. And if I, again, just turn that back round that way, if I tilt that forward, you'll see that I've just worked on the back right and the back left. I've got a huge gap there in the middle, and I haven't worked at all across the front. Okay, so we'll spin that round. Now, I gave you these lovely pieces of fern, and I described how sort of wavy my lines were going to be. So to get the best out of that shape, I'm going to have to remove a lot of the base of that twisty stem, so I've just got a very vertical placed piece of foliage. But because yours are straighter, you'll be able to go taller with yours, so you can use the full length, excuse me, you can use the full length of the fern. Mine are obviously bendy and wavy, but at the moment I'm working in the centre section. So we're continuing those parallel, very straight vertical lines all the way across. You, of course, won't have that little bit of bend in yours, so yours will possibly be that little bit taller. And again, what you're aiming to do is to have the fern, so these two placements of fern, at a different height to the liatris and to the birch, and then we get lots of natural movement. If you picture your borders in the garden, or maybe you might have visited a park recently and they have herbaceous borders, this is what the effect that we're trying to replicate in a more sort of formal pattern. Okay, so to strengthen the birch, because the birch is almost sort of transparent, it disappears a little bit because it's very thin. We're going to strengthen this placement on the left hand side with the lovely liatris that we looked at earlier on. Now not liatris, this is delphinium. So this is the delphinium, the lovely blue, very vibrant colour. Now it's quite a delicate looking flower, but it is quite robust. You possibly will have a little bit of petal drop from it, because as the flowers open more towards the top, the bottom ones will start to fade a little bit. Don't worry too much if you have any drop in petals, it's quite normal for the delphinium. I'm going to leave my side shoots in because they are quite straight and quite parallel to the main stem. But if you feel that they're a little bit untidy and a little bit messy, you can always just cut them off. And again, have a little look at what you've got and start with a smaller flower, giving you the taller placement within the design. So the smaller, thinner flower towards the top, and again look to place it in at a different level to the material that you've already inserted into the foam. And I'm coming now, if I just turn it round for you, you'll see that I'm now working in this front section here, and we're going to cluster it together so we've got a lovely vertical line of the material. And I'm still straight, I haven't come outside of the container, I'm not leaning anything forward like we would do with traditional arranging. Everything is straight and contained within the container. So at an angle again with this plant material, so it inserts into the foam a little bit easier, and place them in so we've got them probably about an inch apart, stepping down so that it brings your eye down towards the front. So if I turn that one round, you can see that this is the taller one, coming down each time like steps, and it makes your eye move all the way down through the design. And then visually we're trying to not repeat the colour or the shape, but we're trying to make each side visually look as pleasing on the left and the right. Now, one of my sort of favourite flowers at this time of the year is this lovely little lilac-y sort of pink flower. This is, as I said earlier, Physotegia. And mine might possibly be a little bit more open than yours because I purchased mine earlier in the week to make sure they were showing a bit of colour to show on the video. And this placement is going to go in the middle. So again, remove any foliage off the bottom. Now, I'm hoping that your fern in the middle is going to be a little bit taller than mine. So I'm going to go in the middle. You're going to lose a little bit of my fern because it's not as tall as what I've provided you with. Anything like that, we'll just add in at the end just to fill in any little gaps. And if I turn that around, that now is just in front of where we put the fern. So the fern is at the back in the middle. And again, if I tilt that one forward, you'll see that the two placements are about 1 inch apart, I would say, in the middle of the foam. So we've got everything hopefully on different levels and different heights. And we've got that lovely soft sort of pink in the middle. Just move my table forward a little bit. And then we're going to go in now with this really lovely vibrant gerbera. Now, we've got an obvious sort of gap here, but if I brought the gerbera on this side, we're going to have a lot of that very dark purple on that right hand side. So the gerbera I'm going to bring over to here. So we're bringing some of this lovely purple onto the opposite side. And then when I come to do the roses will be here on the right hand side. So the gerbera, you'll find that you should have quite tall straight stems, and that's because I've conditioned them overnight and made sure that I've looked after them properly before sending them out to you. Now when gerbera get delivered to me, they come flat in a box and they are lined up like so in the box, flat like this. And then when we take them out of the box, the flower will suspend and hang down from that cardboard box. So what we then do is we hang that over a bucket of water with some specialised floral food, some plant food in there. And that will ensure that the gerbera takes up the water and keeps the stem nice and straight. So some very clever person invented that. If you put them if you buy them in the supermarket, quite often they've just been pushed into the bucket and they haven't had their heads supported. So that's often why you find that the supermarket gerbera, the heads are all bending over this way. They're bending over the bucket that they've been presented in. So good florist gerberas, if they've been conditioned and looked after properly by a professional florist, will always be really straight, like so. Now, if you feel the outside of the gerbera, you will notice that there's lots of very small, fine hairs on the outside, and they are prone to hold in any sort of bacteria on them. So after they've been conditioned for the first 24 hours, where they are placed quite deep in water, you can then put them in a vase yourself at home in quite shallow water, and then that will prevent these small little hairs holding on to the water and any bacteria that might be in the container, and it will prevent them going very mushy and very soft. So a good little sort of tip if you're arranging with gerberas, or if you've bought them in the supermarket, remember just to keep them in a little bit of shallow water. So we're going to bring those down in again a sort of staggered line on my left hand side as I'm working. So I've been encouraging you to cut everything at an angle so that it inserts into the foam better. But with gerbera, because it's a very small, soft stem, we need to cut it straight across, and then there's more surface area for us to insert into the foam. And we have 3 to bring down in a placement just in front of those delphinium there. And a little tip on how to gauge where you want to cut your gerbera. If you hold it upside down in front of the arrangement to roughly where you want the placement to be, then it'll give you an idea of how long you want that gerbera to be. Leave a little bit extra to go into the floral foam. So what I possibly haven't mentioned is most of the material that you're inserting into the foam needs to go in about 1 inch, and that will be secure enough to stop it falling out. and it'll be deep enough then for it to be able to absorb the water. Now this one is just going to come here towards the front. I've possibly cut that a little bit too long. Don't worry if you've cut it too long, because you can obviously make it shorter. The problem occurs when you cut it too short, because we obviously can't attach the stem back on at the bottom. Now a little tip with gerbera, because they don't like the end of the stem. If I just show you the end of the stem, there is a little very small hole in the end of the stem, and once that gets Oasis four-stepped, it minimalises the water uptake a little bit. So what I often suggest you do with a gerbera is put it into the position that you want it to go, push it down a little bit further, and then bring it back up. So what then happens is a well of water will form at the bottom of the gerbera stem. So rather than it being clogged up with all that floral foam and it prevent it from taking up too much water, then you've got a nice little pocket of water sitting at the base of the gerbera, and that always helps them to last that little bit longer. So we're going to step down probably about an inch or so with the next gerbera. And again, if I show you this from the side, you'll see that at the moment everything is sort of contained quite neatly within the shape of the container. I haven't come too far forward with any of the plant material, which is a little bit more of a traditional style of arranging. We're arranging at the moment in quite a European pattern, so everything is still parallel to one another. So if we look at the stems here, we've got roughly the same distance apart, and it's still very much vertically and facing the ceiling rather than coming forward, which is a more traditional style of arranging. Now I'm going to use this one because it's a little bit straighter, and I'm going to step this one down in a fairly equal amount of space between each flower. And you'll see with this one, so up until now I've been arranging everything on that flat section on the top. Now what I've done with this one is I've come in almost on the side, so in this side section here, because I'm coming lower to the container and I've been coming slightly forward with each placement. So the only sizable piece of floral foam now is at the side. So if I get this piece of Oasis, which is blank, we've been arranging all of the flowers on the top, but that last little gerbera is almost tucked in down the side here, and it gives it plenty of water source, but it's still quite contained. We've gone a little bit out, but I'm not bringing it too far forward. So that then helps to bring the colour of the Liatris, that lovely magenta sort of shade, over to this side of the arrangement, but still keeping those nice vertical lines. Now the next flower is that lovely rose. So we're going to use this in just a second, I haven't forgotten about it. Now the leaves on the rose are obviously very scattered and a little bit untidy, and if we arrange leaving the leaves on, it's going to spoil those parallel lines that we've been creating. So for this arrangement, I'm going to remove all of the leaves, and we get that lovely clean stem and clean line that we're working towards. And for most workshops, I always say if there's any little damage to petals, just remove those off. Just very gently take them away. Now I like the guard petals, which have that little bit of green colouring on it. So obviously if it's like this one and it's a little bit damaged, we need to get rid of it. Doesn't do the rose any harm at all. So you can really make your own choice at whether you want to take them off or you want to leave them on. I always think that when they're removed, the rose tends to look a little bit artificial, and it doesn't have that nice natural appearance that it does when we leave them on. but it doesn't do the rose any harm if you remove them or if you leave them on. Okay, so if I just spin this around, you can see that there's an obvious gap now where our roses need to go. And quite often when I get to this stage of arranging and we're in a workshop, we will find that there will be a variation in each person's design. Some of you will have started a lot taller than me, some of you might have been a bit shorter with your placements. So your gerbera placements and the rose placements that I'm just about to put in can be a little bit taller. So you will gauge it really by looking about where your flowers, the original placements are sitting. So for me, you can see there's an obvious gap here, and that's where my three roses are going to go in this gap here. So what you need to do at this stage is look at what you've already done and roughly gauge where your gap is. If you'd gone taller with your outer flower, then you might want to put your placement on the edge, whereas I'm a little bit more towards the centre. And if I just tip it forward, you can see that I've got that whole quarter section there at the front, that front right hand section to put my roses in. And again, if you have a choice, start with the smaller head. I think that's probably the smaller one, and then you get bigger as you come down towards your container. Now this one is more woody, so we're going to cut this one at an angle, and I'm aiming to start at a different height to the gerbera. So you can see I'm taller than the gerbera, but I'm shorter than the placements that we've already put in. So we've got lots of movement. Your eye is moving up and down. It's very natural, very much like the back of your border in your garden. There we are, cut at an angle again, and nice and straight, so the flower head itself is facing the ceiling. And we've got them roughly about 1 inch apart. I just bring that all the way around. You can see the next little rose, getting all the flowers the wrong way around today. The rose, if you measure this gap from the top and the second flower, we're looking to place our third rose the same distance apart. Now, if we were doing traditional flower arranging, at this point we would start bringing these flowers forward to give us a profile and to give us some depth. But with more modern sort of flower arranging, following more European styles and European rules, we're going to keep the design straight and nice and parallel. So you can see we've got an equal sort of space between each little rose, and hopefully they're on a different level to the main gerbera on this side. And again, as I said earlier, it creates a nice bit of movement with the eye. Now, because we have the gerbera, which is quite a strong colour, this is probably the most dominant flower within the design. With that one little gerbera that we have left, we're going to bring it over to this side. So we're bringing a little bit of a link of colour over onto the right side. And then we'll do the same with that single rose that's left. And we're going to bring the single rose onto the opposite side. Now this time, this little gerbera is going to be quite flat down, almost sitting on top of that container there. So it's lower than those three placements, and it's slightly angled off. Just turn that round a little bit. We just adjust that. We need it facing forward, but at a slightly different angle to the gerbera on the opposite side. Otherwise, they're going to look like a pair of headlights. Push that down a little bit more. So it's almost sitting on the container. What we don't want to do is have these angled and facing in exactly the same position, otherwise they tend to look like a very dominant pair of headlights facing you. And then this little rose that's left is going to go on the opposite side, so we're bringing the pink through to the opposite side. Now I've got quite an obvious gap here, so my pink rose is probably going to go there, but depending on where you've placed your line of the dark gerbera, you might find that your pink rose will sit this side. So at this stage you have to use your own imagination a little bit to think about where you're going to put it. Yeah, so I'm going to put that at the front. So we've got a link of the pink coming through onto the opposite side. So what do we think so far? How's that coming together? Now then, we had these very large little leaves. Large little, that doesn't make much sense, does it? We had these lovely baby Aralia, and hopefully you've got one that's slightly bigger than the other. And the reason I've done that is because they're going to sit on top of one another. This is a method called terracing or stepping, and they'll end up, when they're in the floral foam, they're going to look like two steps. So the bottom one would be your bottom step, and so forth, so on as we go up. We've got two. Again, I mentioned earlier on, in contemporary sort of floral design, using two is quite acceptable. If we were arranging it traditionally, it would be a 3. And again, I've got a little gap there at the front where those Aralia happen to fit quite nicely. And if you end up hiding this gerbera, because the leaf is a little bit larger there in the centre, we can always move the gerbera so it's more visible. And the next Aralia, which is the smaller of the leaves, is going to sit quite nicely in towards the centre. And if I spin that round, you can see how they're sitting on top of one another, like so. And again, even though I've come a little bit outside the container, it's not too far. And you can have a little play around with those, just make sure they're sitting quite comfortably on top of one another. Just bring that gerbera, so all I've done is just lifted the gerbera on top of the leaf so you can see it quite clearly. Now you've got, I think you've probably got at least 10 of these really lovely leaves, and you'll see that once I start placing these in, it gives us some what we call visual weights. It makes your eye travel down to the darker colour at the bottom. And I've given you 10 so that you can spread them out throughout the base of the design. So I don't think I'm going to need quite 10. And I'm going to do the same sort of technique. I'm going to layer them one on top of the other, so we get this sort of terracing effect with the leaves. I'm going to put 2 out on that side, and then we'll have sort of 2 towards the front. Now what we don't want to do is to have this colour leaf on exactly the same position on either side, because like I described with the gerbera looking like 2 headlights, if these are in exactly the same position left and right, we'll end up with them looking like a sort of pair of wings. So I angled these 2 more towards the side, so you can see these 2 are sitting on top of the handle, and these 2 are facing a little bit further forward. So hopefully they're not at those matching positions on either side. They're slightly different, creating a slightly different perspection. Perspection? Perspection. Perspective. Get there in the end. Perspective. Slightly different perspective. Can you see? I'll just turn that round. Now you've got 10, so you can continue in that manner to use up your 10 leaves. I've got one here, which I'll just bring towards the centre as well, so we've got a little bit of a link there towards the centre. And this gives us ground weight. This is what we call groundwork, and this is very typical of a parallel arrangement. Now I did say earlier on, if you have anything left out of the side shoots of the flower, we can always tuck that in just at the back there. And then the last flower to go in, or sorry, the last foliage I should say, is going to be this lovely pistache. If you have any of the fern left, you have probably used yours to the full height, but if you've got any small little bits of the fern, you can always tuck that in and fill in any little gaps there. Now with the final finishing off of the design, we're going to just use this pistache, and you'll see if I tilt this forward, there's still quite a lot of the floral foam that's visible there at the back. Now if we don't cover that, it will lose its water much quicker. The water will evaporate off there much quicker than if we cover it with some foliage or some moss. It will retain the moisture within the foam. So quite often, right at the very end, we just use a more economical sort of foliage, cut quite short. So I only need short little pieces, and I'm just going to use them in an upright position. We could probably cut that into two. So we're putting them again so they're facing upwards. We don't need to drape them over the edge of the container. And all a bit tangled up there. Some short little bits. And you've been given quite a nice sized stem. You might have one large stem, you might have a couple of smaller stems. But just keep working all the way along until the back of that foam is covered up. And I'll spin that round in just a second so you can see how it's all covered. It's a nice robust foliage. So there's always a bit of the boring bit now when I'm covering in the back. And then if you're looking at it from the front and you can see any obvious gaps with the floral foam, then you might want to tuck a few bits of the pistache foliage down there into the base. And I've just brought a little tiny bit towards the front just so that it breaks up that very heavy flat leaf in the front. And I think that's pretty much done. So if I just tilt it forward, we'll have a look from the back. If I tilt it forward, you'll see that nearly all of that floral foam is covered. You can water it from the back, so fill a jug or a bottle or something and keep it well watered. We're apparently having a heat wave next week, so I would suggest that you water it every day. Keep it away from any direct heat sources, the radiator or the TV, and don't put it in any direct sunlight. So the cooler position it's in, the better it's going to last for you. And the foliage in particular is a really long lasting one, so that's going to go on forever and ever. Just spin that round for you to see the front. And you can see those very clear parallel lines that I talked about and described at the very beginning. So that's the European inspired parallel design. Now hopefully you've got a successful design. You can watch the video as many times as you want. So if you're unclear about something, just rewind and start again. Enjoy the experience. Don't worry at all if the design doesn't look like mine, if it's slightly different, if it's taller or shorter. There's a few of you doing it together, so a couple of you have booked to do the workshop at home together. Don't worry if it doesn't look like your friend. Just enjoy it and have a nice time and enjoy the beautiful flowers. And hopefully we'll do another workshop next month, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye everyone.